My name is Emily Vincent, and I'm a cardiac ICU nurse at Cornell Hospital in New York City, as well as a sheep farmer in Bern, New York. And I want to thank you, Assembly members, for taking the time to hear my testimony today regarding the impacts that poison parsnip has upon my sheep and pasture land production, and the need for the Department of Agriculture and Markets to assist with funding in the upcoming budget. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
Don't worry about us.
Okay.
We are too.
I'm not as good as Olivia was. My farm is proudly the first sheep farm in New York State to be grown and certified. I'm actually really proud of that. I have the plaque at home. And we work with the Albany County Soil and Water and NRCS to conserve our lands and protect our water sources. We sell our meat at Honest Weight Food Co-op in Albany and at the Del Mar Farmers Market. We also sell breeding stock throughout the United States. I have submitted copies of my testimony, and in it are graphs for you to reference, as well as online resources to which I will refer. In the first portion of my testimony, I will speak to you as a nurse on the physiological impacts that wild parsnip has on humans. In the second half of my testimony, I will speak to you as a shepherdess and how it's affecting my farming and production. Finally, I will give you a few ideas that I have on how New York can help curb the spread of this vicious plant. And it's very vicious. New York State lists wild parsnip, Pastinus sativa, on the invasive species website for a reason. It's incredibly invasive and very difficult to get under control. Additionally, this pesky plant causes serious burns and often irreversible damage to your skin. This plant also causes temporary or permanent blindness. Yeah, it's really great. This plant produces a toxin in its sap called, furocoumarin, which causes a chemical burn on your skin and actually binds to your DNA and reacts to sunlight. This is called phytophotodermatitis. It's terrible. My husband had it on his legs and still bears the scars from these chemical burns. There is no cure for this. The only treatment is to treat the symptoms. The worst thing about the chemical burns is that when the area is exposed to the sunlight, it begins to burn again, and it can last for up to 2 years. So just when you get it, when it reacts, it will re-react to the sunlight. So it's not fun. So the essential oil of parsnip roots also contains a large percentage of myriastine, a strong human hallucinogen, but I've never tried it, I promise. So that was my nursing speech for poison parsnip. The biannual poison parsnip is now affecting my sheep, though. And not only can the sap hurt humans, but I also hypothesize that it's binding to my sheep DNA and hurting them. This past summer, I had a yearly visit. I'm part of NICEGAP, which is New York State Agriculture's, they follow sheep and goat producers. It's a volunteer, and so I have the New York State vet, Amy Wilsey, out. And she observed some of these burns on my sheep's mouth, and she thought, well, maybe it was sore mouth, which is a viral disease, but we tested it, and it was not sore mouth. And my only hypothesis, and hers as well, that when they trample the poison parsnip that I have in my fields right now, that they break off the stalks and the sap is released, and when they're grazing close to the ground, they get it on their mouth. And so it is painful for them. So the sheep that had been affected lost weight, and they had to be put into my sheep hospital. Good thing I'm a nurse. Other farmers also note that their sheep have been affected by this plant as sheep move through the grazing pastures, and I had talked about that. Ontario also realizes the agricultural impact that parsnip has, stating that, quote, it is not valuable as a forage plant, and in fact the chemical compounds in wild parsnip inhibit weight gain and fertility in livestock that feed on it. So I produced my own small study on the farm over 4 years to show a correlation between increased feed costs, lowered fertility, and the increase in parsnip that I had over my fields. You will note in my graphs in figure 2 and 3 at the end of my testimony. In addition to the painful sores that it produced on my sheep, it lowered my pasture's forage production. The plant grows in clumps and crowds out the beneficial and edible plants like grasses and legumes, and causes me to have to brush hog my growing fields, wasting valuable forage that I have to purchase at the end of the year from other farms in the area due to my decreased pasture production. This year, as you know, it was simply too wet to get in and cut them down on most of my fields. I was able to brush hog my top 3 fields multiple times. However, the parsnip kept coming back after each mowing. Not only did the parsnip keep coming back, but also the spotted knapweed, and they were both unaffected by multiple and very intensive mowings that I did. In 2015, I had poisoned parsnip in my ditches around my farm. The highway department cut the ditches, and the parsnip seeds floated into my fields and spread. In subsequent years, the parsnip spread aggressively, and this past year, over 50% of my fields were ungrazable. As evidenced by the multiple mowings, the parsnip is unaffected by that, and in fact, it spread. This steady destruction of my pastures led to the increased feed costs, as you'll see on Figure 1, reduced animal production, as you'll see on Figure 2, and lowered weight gains, which, sorry, I didn't make a graph for, but it's true. Not only is it not good for a sheep farmer, but it's not good for any farmer, including hay farmers, and also the beef and cattle industry and dairy. On hay fields, this could lead to potential flock devastation, as dried chop matter is much harder for the sheep to selectively graze because it's already baled up in the bale. Dr. Wilsey from the New York State, as a New York State vet, recounted cattle herds that have had deaths due to poison plant species being chopped up and fed to cattle in chopped feed. So what are the next steps? What have other states done? Well, they've used the right people and resources to combat this problem, probably not a nurse and a shepherdess. They've regulated the problem. Some people actually eat parsnip. I don't like it, but some people do eat it. But as a result, some states decided to regulate the commercial growing of wild parsnip. There are various strains of parsnip. So they've said you can't grow wild parsnip. So it's regulated in Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. Also, we can prevent the establishment and spread of wild parsnip through timed mowings, and we can provide education to cities and municipalities of the correct timing of cutting to eradicate this plant, or partner with NRCS to protect the natural habitats while they're cutting, and refer to references for other aspects of mowing. Timed chemical applications, I know that's kind of, some people are against chemicals, but that's really the only thing that kills it. So the right chemicals at the right time in an ideal environment and weather conditions. And then controlled burning does not kill them, just so you know. It kills the established, some of the established plants, it doesn't, and some of the newly emerging seedlings, but it doesn't kill them all. And I put a reference in there. I believe Ontario did a study on that. Hand pulling and root destruction, if you have time to do 100 acres of that, which nobody has time. Increase native seedings of ditches and roadways, which would help after the counties cut the ditches to reseed with native plants, because that increases competition of desirable plants with poison parsnip. And they've done studies on that as well. And then funding the solution. Possible state grants to local farmers overwhelmed by parsnip infestations. Farmers could apply for these grants, maybe through soil and water districts, and document a need in this. This will hopefully prevent the further expansion as a plant produces 1,000 seeds per flower. And then possible grants also could include the chemicals or sprayer rentals, and then the farm could do an in-kind producing using their own tractors, gas, and labor. And then close monitoring at the end. Where are we now? We don't know how fast it's spreading. So really looking at that and what impact has the intervention had on the problem. Thank you for your time.
Emily, thanks for being here. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Emily and Kevin are actually from my district. I mentioned you earlier when the commissioner was here and I talked about this issue. And I think he mentioned some of the timed mowing and some of the other possible solutions to this. You mentioned the chemicals. We talked about this in the past when I visited your farm. Being an organic farmer, that creates a challenge, right?
Definitely, and that's why I hadn't done it. I went to Albany County Soil and Water and actually had NRCS come out and walk my farm and try to give me other options that I could use. I overseeded per their advice. I also did timed mowings, and it didn't help. And I'm sure that it's not their fault. It's just very invasive.
And the other thing we talked about when I visited the area, you showed me the fields. I think one of the fields you couldn't use at all because it was
Right.
just completely overrun. When you said when the sheep typically they don't go after this plant unless there's no other grass
Correct.
to eat, and then they will eat it?
Absolutely. And the problem is the young sheep are usually the ones that go after it because they're not as smart. It takes a few years to figure that out for sheep. So my fields, I couldn't use them because really, I mean, they were going after the smaller seedlings of the poison parsnip and they were getting the burns on their faces. So the vet actually said to pull them out, even though I had other grasses in there, she said to just pull them completely out of it. So 50% of my fields were unusable this year.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was not good. So my feed costs went up, and as you see on the graphs, and I'm sorry, it's not a true scientific experiment because I didn't have a control group, because they're all in this. But as poison parsnip increased, and I have a map of my farm through my grazing system with Albany County Soil and Water, so I had percentage of poison parsnip as part of my fields. As it increased, my feed costs went up. Because of that, I had to supplement with hay, and I couldn't feed them from it. And then also my twin production went down. As you see on figure 2, I was twinning at about 40 to 50%, which is an average, I would say, of sheep farmers. And then in 2018, it went down to almost 7, which is devastating for me. I mean, I produce meat, you know. I mean, I work as a nurse to pay the bills for the farm until I can get it going, as we all do. But it was really devastating because, you know, I depend on that to pay for my increased hay costs.
And while I was there, you also, I mean, the farming community is a tight-knit community.
Yes.
And you're from the town of Bern, but in that, just in the area, in the small area that you live in and the farmers that you know, this is not an isolated problem. I mean, you're in your conversations with other local farmers, they're experiencing very similar challenges.
Absolutely. And people have come by and said, you know, what are you doing about it? And so it's definitely a topic of conversation, especially when, you know, farmers are already struggling. You know, we have a very, I mean, the middleman gets the most money, you know. And so when I'm trying to produce something that is going to market at a very low cost, I don't have that kind of margin to play with. I don't have, you know, thousands of extra dollars to buy feed, which I had to do this year.
Yeah. And certainly what you said with the funding, something we talked about with the commissioner, hopefully that'll, some information will come
I think
back.
he grows parsnip.
I hope that the committee will consider.
Not that kind of.
And I've asked both of you to be here because I think it's a issue certainly affecting my district, and I think it's more widespread than we even know. And I don't know, you know, how many other farms across the state, or possibly, you know, maybe even outside the state, that are being affected by this. It's maybe a national discussion at some point if it continues. But I know with the knapweed that we're going to talk about, when you mow this down, it actually further expands the problem because of the seeds, right?
Absolutely.
So describe that process. When you mow it down, the next year, it's grown exponentially.
Absolutely. So the seed actually is viable in the soil for up to 5 years. So at any time, any given year, it can just sprout. So even if you treat it with chemicals or mow it, it comes back. And so, you know, a lot of farms in the area are being leased or rented. If the farmer doesn't have enough money to pay for chemicals to try to bring the pasture back or the hay fields back, then they let them go dormant. And the problem is they're letting everything take over, the knapweed and the poison parsnip. And so, like the field above me, it's 80 acres and it was for sale. So the farmer stopped farming it and let it go. He didn't replant grass there. So it was just, he had corn there previously, so he cut all the corn and left it. So then what takes over? The most invasive thing possible, which is poison parsnip and knapweed. And so from that field, it spread to mine as well as in the ditches when the county cut it when it was at seed. So, you know, that didn't help me out at all. So I think that, you know, part of the problem is farmers retiring and leaving fields to go dormant, or people just not having the money to take care of the fields that are already there. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. And well, thank you for the testimony, the information. Hopefully this will become a priority in the budget, trying to find a way to address the issue or begin to find solutions. And as we said, chemicals are not always the answer, especially since you're being an organic farmer. that creates another challenge. So we have to look for other ways, and we'll look to prioritize funding in the budget that could help with this. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, you guys.
Good afternoon, Assembly Standing Committee on Agriculture, Chairman McGee and the members of the committee. My name is Kevin Crozier. I'm a retired City of Albany firefighter paramedic, and I also served as the Burntown supervisor for 15 years. But my true passion is hay farming. I want to thank the opportunity to present testimony on the ag and markets budget and for your continued support of New York State farmers. Providing quality hay for horses is the main focus of our hay farm operation. As you know, New York State equine industry is the second largest agricultural commodity after dairy. The New York horse industry produces goods and services valued at over $2.4 billion annually. As a hay producer, providing quality hay for horses is a critical component of the horse industry. Horses require high-quality hay in order to maintain their health. Unlike cows and other farm animals, if horses are fed a poorer quality hay, they can colic and die. The largest challenge facing New York hay producers is the invasive plant called the spotted knapweed, which I had given you. Spotted knapweed is on the primary list of invasive plants in New York State. This rapidly spreading weed can take over an entire field in just a few short years. The weed has no value to horses or any other livestock. Spotted knapweed grows 2 to 3 feet tall, with its roots giving off a poison which kills all competing grasses and renders the entire field useless. New York hay is sought after by horse farms in other states for its quality, but once the knapweed is found in the hay, it's no longer saleable. The best method to control this and other invasive weeds is a broadleaf herbicide. This herbicide will spread to the root system, killing the weeds and allowing the native grasses to return to productive fields. The herbicide does not remain or harm the native grasses and therefore does not have any negative effect on the hay or the livestock that consumes the hay. The herbicide simply eliminates the invasive weeds such as the spotted knapweed. One of the challenges for many farmers is the cost of the herbicide, which can cost up to $100 a quart. 1 quart can only treat about 4 to 5 acres when mixed with water and sprayed on a field. This does not include the cost of the spraying equipment, fuel, and time that it takes. As a result, many farmers walk away, leaving fields unproductive and allowing the invasive species to spread to nearby fields, which in turn can be left unproductive to further spread the invasive weeds. I would ask you to consider, in order to assist farmers, hay farmers, and other farmers in combating the spotted knapweed and other invasives, would recommend that the New York State Agricultural Markets budget include a noxious weed fund to target invasive and noxious weeds, such as spotted knapweed and poison parsnip. The grant funds could be distributed by the soil and water conservation districts in those counties. Just on another note, it may not be in some areas of the state. Other areas are so heavily infested that if you look at the plant that I just gave you and try to imagine a 50-acre field filled with this. I'm a retired firefighter. The fire load in those fields is great, equal to the forest fires that you see in California. The more people that walk away from these fields, the more potential for those types of fires. That's not a fire that you're going to walk into with a broom and put it out. It would cause a major disaster. It's just a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. But the spotted knapweed literally in 2 years can take over an entire field. And where we are in Albany County, it's just rampant. It's just, one of those heads on that plant that I just showed you carries about 1,100 seeds per head. So what happens is when people say, well, I'll mow it and that'll kill it, it has the opposite effect. You mow it and it spreads. And then it spreads to the next farm field and to the next farm field, and it's carried by hay equipment, and it's a vicious cycle, and it's gotten to an epidemic proportion in our county. So I would just ask if you could consider something like that.
Okay.
And if it's in our county, it'll be in yours
Yeah.
soon.
Unfortunately, because it travels.
It does.
It travels in the hay, so.
Coming to a county near
Kevin,
you.
when I visited your farm, you had, I mean, this is part of your production, is to sell hay. You've lost a lot of it. It certainly has affected your bottom line, not being able to make the sale of the hay that you normally do.
Also, some of the chemicals that are used to treat the knapweed and the parsnip are heavily regulated by DEC. I have to be honest, a lot of farmers in our county will drive to Pennsylvania where it's not regulated, buy the product and drive it back to New York to spray their fields. They're so desperate to get a handle on this. We've tried some stuff that you could buy over the counter, like 2,4-D and some of those. It just doesn't, just won't do it. It won't kill the root of the plant. It may wilt the leaves for a year and slow it, but by fall, it's already started to grow again. So it's a they're expensive, but that's why the farmers are walking away and leaving the fields just unviable. Once that's detected in your hay, we were selling a lot of hay to Connecticut.
Yep.
And once they find that in there, they just won't.
Kevin, the horses won't eat it once it's in there? Is that?
No, livestock won't eat it at all. I mean, if you just look at that, it's a woody product after it's grown to maturity. You can't, there's no value to it. The animals won't eat it.
The problem is also if somebody finds it in their hay, and the animals won't eat it, they in turn just spread it on their fields. And so then the problem now is in Connecticut and not just Albany County, New York.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, animals ingest the seeds. If they do eat it, the seeds aren't digested, they're passed out when they go into the fields. And so this is definitely a reason why we're coming before you. I've lost half of my production because of it. And so that's why we want a grant fund that can be distributed out through Soil and Water for noxious weeds.